Morning, everybody. We are up to the Carolina Hurricanes, which means Chicago, Colorado, Columbus. After that, nice alphabetical like. The Carolina Hurricanes, of course, started out as the Hartford Whalers, who came over from the WHA. Coming over from the WHA, there were some famous names attached to the team, whether it was Bobby Hull, Gordie Howe, or anybody with the last name Howe, really. And pretty darn quickly, all of the excitement over joining the NHL dissipates when you see the attendance numbers in Hartford, and a lot of issues come up, and eventually they end up in Carolina, where they are now. Now, when we look at their all-time leading scorers, this, of course, is just time in the National Hockey League. This is including the Whalers and the Hurricanes. Ron Francis leads the way with 382 goals, 793 assists, 1,175 points. And he ended up playing for both Hartford and Carolina and is closely tied to both. Eric Staal, 322 goals, 453 assists, 775 points. Kevin Dineen, 250 goals, 294 assists, 544 points. And it is easily forgotten that Kevin Dineen was pretty strong offensively when he first came into the league. Rod Brindamore, 174 goals, 299 assists, 473 points. Jeff O'Neill, 198 goals, 218 assists, 416 points. And yes, for fans of Overdrive and Leafs Lunch on TSN, that Jeff O'Neill. Pat Verbeek, 192 goals, 211 assists, 403 points. Jeff Skinner, 204 goals, 175 assists for 379 points. Blaine Stoughton, amazing mustache on that guy, 219 goals, 158 assists, 377 points. Jeff Sanderson, 196 goals, 173 assists, 369 points. And Eric Cole, 168 goals, 195 assists, 363 points. And I believe he had 2 go-arounds with Carolina. Something tells me it might have been 3, but I'm pretty sure it was 2. Your wins leaders, well, this isn't even close. Cam Ward, 318. Artur Serbe, 130. Mike Liut, 115. Sean Burke, 107. Peter Sidorkiewicz is still on the list with 71. He, of course, ended up going to Ottawa in the expansion draft back in the early 90s. Ward's going to be their leading wins goaltender probably forever. I don't see Mrazek ever reaching that number. And I'm not sure that there's anybody in the organization that I say, yeah, I could see 300 wins there. Shutouts, Cam Ward leads there as well, 27. Irbe has 20. Mike Liut has 13. Sean Burke and Kevin Weeks are tied for 4th with 11 shutouts each. So there's Kevin Weeks on the board. And I noticed something already that's kind of odd, that Kevin Weeks and Steve Weeks, no relation, not spelled the same either. They both played for the same 3 teams. Now they both bounced around the league a bit, and there's some diversion between the two, but I'm almost tempted to make a video on the careers of Kevin Weeks and Steve Weeks. All right. For just some trivia kind of stuff, Brian Burke axed Brass Bonanza when he was in Hartford. So Brass Bonanza, a song that, of course, Carolina used while wearing the Hartford jerseys this year. Yeah, Brian Burke hated it. And he axed it and said there were players that were embarrassed to come out and to that song. And it came back after he left. But there was some other stuff going on for Hartford at that point. Peter Karmanos. I know, boo. I know if you're a Hartford fan. He vowed to stay in Hartford when he bought the team in 1994. However, 3 years later he left. Basically, it was, I'm going to keep the team here. And then it seemed that he saw the books a couple years in, and he's like, this just doesn't work. But here's what happened. Here's what upset everybody. So he said, I need to hit a certain amount of season tickets, or else we're going to move. And then he made it so you kind of had to buy the entire 41-game pack. He did away with 9, 10, 12, 20-game packs. And just the stuff that normal people can buy, because he wanted to drag in corporate money. Well, there wasn't any interest from corporate donors and corporate types that might want seats for a hockey game. They're like, we don't want to go to a Hartford Whalers game. But there was a grassroots effort to keep the team, and they got pretty close to that 12,000 season tickets he wanted. And actually, attendance the last year in Hartford was pretty good. But Karmanos had made up his mind. And famously, this team was almost moved to Norfolk, Virginia, but ticket sales were low. So they had a ticket drive in Norfolk, and no. People in Virginia went, not really interested. They would have been the Hampton Roads Rhinos, I believe. So yeah, that was an almost, and then no, and then he goes, oh, that's fine, we're moving. The weird thing is, Karmanos announced they were moving before he had anywhere to go. So if he hadn't been able to find Carolina, if Raleigh hadn't stepped forward, that would have been interesting, wouldn't it? All right, I'm leaving. Okay, you don't have anywhere to go. No, I'm going to go, but you guys are going to miss me when I'm gone. All right, go. You got nowhere to go. In Hartford and Carolina's history, they've had 40 seasons in the National Hockey League. They've made the playoffs 14 times. And they won the Cup in 2006 in Carolina. They went to the finals in Carolina in 2002. They've gone to the conference finals numerous times in and around that as well. Carolina doesn't make the playoffs very often, but boy howdy, when they do, they make it count. The Whalers only won one round of Stanley Cup playoffs in their entire existence. Ouch. 96-97 was their last year in Hartford, and their attendance was 13,680 on average per game, which was the highest it had been in 7 years. But it was still 24th out of 26 teams, beating only the New York Islanders and the LA Kings. In 7 years, that's not good enough. So the highest we've been in 7 years is 24th out of 26. Sorry. Their lowest was 9,854 in 79-80. They also had 10,144 fans on average in 92-93. So he comes in a year after that low of 10,000 and says, I'm going to help. I'm going to keep the team here. And it doesn't help. 2018-2019, the season we just had, 14,322 is their average, which is the highest it's been in 5 years, but it's still 28th out of 31, ahead of only Arizona, Florida, and the New York Islanders. So 20 plus years, and the New York Islanders are still at the bottom, which is why the Islanders are going to get a new building, and they're doing everything they can to rejuvenate things in that organization because it's been kind of stuck in neutral for a very long time. The highest that the team was overall, 17,560 was the average in the lockout shortened 2012-2013 season, and that would definitely dwarf anything they had in Hartford. They needed a new building in Hartford as well. It just didn't work. So even when the fans showed up, I'm sure Karmanos was like, well, it's nice they showed up, but I still got to move because this building sucks. So that's kind of where it ended up with Hartford. Winningest coaches the team ever saw, Paul Maurice at 384. He's going to be up there for a while. Peter Laviolette, 167. Jack Evans, 163. Bill Peters, 137. And Larry Plow with 81. So there's a very real opportunity for Rod Brindamore to end up at least 5th by the end of next season, which does not mean that I redo this next season, just so people know. Captains, it is a shorter list than it is for some other teams, and I'd like to thank the organization for not having so many captains. Rick Lee from 79 through 81. Mike Rogers, 80-81. Davey Keon, 81-82. Russ Anderson, 82-83. Mark Johnson, 83-85. Ron Francis, 84-91. And 99-2004. Only one that shows up as a captain for Hartford and Carolina. Randy LaDoucher, 91-92. Pat Verbeek, 92-95. Brendan Shanahan, 95-96. Kevin Dineen, 96 through 98. Keith Primo, 98-99. Scott Pellerin, 2000 to 2001. Rod Brindamore, 2005 to 2010. Eric Staal, 2009 to 2016. Justin Falk and Jordan Staal, both captains, co-captains, 2017-2018. And this past season, Justin Williams, 2018-2019. And we don't know yet whether or not Williams will return to Carolina, take that captaincy back, or they might have to find somebody new. Maybe they just go back to Jordan Staal. Top 10 draft picks. So in their history, they've had a bunch of these because Hartford/Carolina have been near the bottom of the league a lot. So again, when they make it, like they did this year, they go to the conference final and everything's fantastic, but what they usually miss. They've never had the number 1 draft pick, though. 1980, they draft at number 8. They draft Fred Arthur, who never makes it. He makes it to the NHL, but he's never the player they envisioned him to be. Some of the annuals I've got here from the early 80s really envisioned him to be a lot more than what he ended up being. 1981, drafting at number 4, they draft Ron Francis. 1983, drafting at number 2, they draft Sylvain Turgeon. 1985, drafting at number 5, they draft Dana Merson. Yeah, Dana Merson was a number 5 overall draft pick. So for people old enough to remember Dana Merson, he doesn't seem like a top first round kind of prospect. 1989, drafting at 10th, they draft Bobby Holik. 1991, drafting 9th, they draft Patrick Poulin. 1992, drafting 9th, they draft Robert Petrovicki. 1993, drafting 2nd, they draft Chris Pronger. So for people who may not know, Chris Pronger is drafted by the Hartford Whalers. 1994, drafting 5th overall, they draft Jeff O'Neill. Now we go to Carolina. Carolina drafting in 2003, so there's a nice 9 years in there where they weren't drafting in the top 10. Number 2 in 2003 was Eric Staal. 2004, drafting 4th, Andrew Ladd. 2005, drafting 3rd, Jack Johnson. 2010, drafting 7th, Jeff Skinner. 2013, drafting 5th, Elias Lindholm. 2014, drafting 7th, Hayden Fleury. 2015, drafting 5th, Noah Hannafin. And then they win the draft lottery. At least they win the number 2 pick, Andrei Svechnikov. And every time I see that in 2018, I think of Brian Burke saying this isn't fair. They weren't one of the worst teams. They shouldn't have got that. And I kept thinking, which Carolina organization have you been watching? Because this team has been stuck at near the bottom of the league for a while. So nice to see them get Svechnikov, number 2 pick. And they do pretty well with number 2 picks. Sylvain Turgeon, Chris Pronger, and Eric Staal. Turgeon, you could look at and say was a miss. But they did pretty well for him when they ended up trading him. And so we'll get into the trade side of things. Now, the trade side of things, I can just go ahead and move that over because it's a huge board. It's 3 feet by 4 feet. Anyways, notable trades. The ones in green are Hartford, and I wanted them to be all nice, and then I realized I don't have room for Carolina, so I had to do the Carolina ones smaller, but it's okay because we will go through them together. July 30th, 1981. So again, with notable trades, I try to go through ones that I think were pretty major. Hartford gets Don Gillen, Rick McLeish, Blake Wesley, a 1982 first-round pick, which was Paul Lawless, a second and a third. That third-round pick became Kevin Dineen. Philadelphia gets Ray Allison, Fred Arthur, and a 1982 first, which becomes Ron Sutter, and a third-round pick. Ron Sutter was drafted 4th overall by Philly. And overall, that's a trade that kind of works out for both teams. December 21st, 1981, Hartford gets Pierre LaRouche and a 1984 first-round pick, Sylvain Cote. And a third, Montreal gets a first in 1984. So they're trading away a draft pick that's years down the road. But that becomes Peter Svoboda. Whoops. A second in 1984 as well, which is Brian Benning, and a 1985 third-round draft pick. So kind of a misstep there. That's one of those we are trying to get better now kind of things. So Montreal trying to get rid of Pierre LaRouche. The good news is LaRouche has a pretty good run for Hartford, and then they end up dumping him off. And in the history video I'm going to do today about the 83-84 season, we'll get into where Pierre LaRouche ended up. Because he only lasts about 2 years with Hartford. August 19th, 1982, Hartford gets Greg C. Adams. Not to be confused with Gus Adams, who played for Vancouver. So there were 2 Greg Adams in the NHL at the same time, just to keep us honest. Ken Linsman, 1983 first-round pick, and a third. Philadelphia gets Mark Howe, and a 1983 third-round pick, Derek Smith, going the other way. So Mark Howe becomes a Flyer, and Hartford ends up with Ken Linsman, who they then swap that same day. He goes to Edmonton with Don Nackbauer. Hartford gets Risto Sultanen and Brent Loney. So Hartford comes out of this with not much. And that's kind of what happens with this team in the 80s, the 90s. They make trades with teams that would go on to win a Stanley Cup. I wasn't able to get it all on the board, but I was surprised at how many of these trades I was looking at their history and going, oh, well, that set up a Stanley Cup nicely. That was nice of them to do that for somebody else. February 21st, 1985, the Hartford Whalers acquire Mike Liut and Jorgen Pedersen. St. Louis acquires Mark Johnson and Greg Millen. So Hartford, I would give them a mild win in that one, although I like Mark Johnson a lot as well. November 21st, 1985, Hartford gets Dave Babich. Winnipeg gets Ray Neufeld. Yeah, I'll give that as a win to Hartford. June 17th, 1989, Hartford gets Pat Verbeek. New Jersey gets Sylvain Turgeon. Sylvain Turgeon, throughout his career, he bounced around a bit, and honestly, teams kept looking at his potential, looking at where he got drafted, and it's going, maybe we can get this guy going. He had 30-goal seasons. He had some good seasons. He never quite hit the ceiling that was expected of him when he was drafted second overall. March 4th, 1991. This is one of those setting up a Stanley Cup trades. They acquired John Cullen, Jeff Parker, and Zarley Zalapski from Hartford, one of the greatest names in the history of the game. Pittsburgh gets Ron Francis, Grant Jennings, and Ulf Samuelsson. So that's a very one-sided trade. At the time it's made, John Cullen, very good young forward, and Hartford intended to have him as their number one center. And it didn't look like an awful trade until 3 months later when Ron Francis is holding up the Stanley Cup. That's when you go, I think Pittsburgh won this deal. And then they held up the Stanley Cup a year after as well. And Cullen was not able to maintain that top-level scoring for very long. August 28th, 1992. This kind of sets up a Stanley Cup down the road, too. Hartford gets Sean Burke and Eric Weinrich. New Jersey gets Bobby Holik and a 1993 second, Jay Pandolfo. Pandolfo, good role player who will be important to New Jersey down the road. And, of course, Bobby Holik, fantastic run he had in New Jersey, and then he signed with the Rangers for excessive amounts of money, and he was never going to live up to that contract. July 29th, 1995, the Hartford Whalers acquire Brendan Shanahan. Good deal, until you look and see Chris Pronger going the other way. They felt Pronger wasn't taking that next step fast enough. They lost patience with Pronger. They wanted to see something happen. So they turned Pronger into Shanahan, which even at the time, even though Pronger wasn't really making those advances, fans looked at that and went, wait, what? Pronger's going to be a beast. And he gets to St. Louis, and lo and behold, he is. October 9th, 1996, the Hartford Whalers acquire Paul Coffey, Keith Primo, and a 1997 first. Detroit acquires Brian Glynn and Brandon Shanahan. And, of course, Shanahan with Detroit that year would help lead them to a Stanley Cup. Hartford does it again. They turn Chris Pronger into Paul Coffey, Keith Primo, and a first. And Primo's a good player, not saying he's not. Coffey's towards the end of his career. And as you see, it's a 1997 first, so it wasn't anybody of note or of consequence. And they gave up Pronger. This is one of those things, I talked about it yesterday in the 82-83 history video, where teams will get impatient with going through the process of building, and they'll trade away better players who are younger for older players who are more established, and then those younger players take that next step. The older players are older players, and before you know it, you've got a series of losing trades on your ledger. So that's the last trade as Hartford. So they go to Carolina. First trade of note from Carolina, January 23rd, 2000. Carolina gets Rod Brindamore, Jean-Marc Pelletier, a 2000 second round pick. Philadelphia gets Keith Primo and a 2005 rounder. So to try to make up for the trade that they lost with Detroit for Brendan Shanahan, this helps. Rod Brindamore has a solid career with Carolina, and Primo goes to Philadelphia. Primo being a guy that Philadelphia really should have drafted. It's kind of odd, they ended up with Ricci. The guy who was just your prototypical Philadelphia guy would have been Primo, but he's drafted by Detroit. He eventually ends up in Philly. And, of course, Philly ended up with Ricci that year. January 20th, 2004, Carolina gets Justin Williams. Philadelphia gets Danny Markov. So, of course, Justin Williams would play a major role for Carolina. See what's happening now? Now Carolina's picking up guys who will help them win a Stanley Cup. On that note, January 30th, 2006, it's rental time. Doug Waite and Irki Rahamaki are picked up by Carolina. St. Louis gets Jesse Boulerice, Mike Zigomanis, a 2006 first fourth, a 2007 fourth, and Magnus Conberg as well. So a lot of people going the other way, but Doug Waite goes to Carolina, wins the Stanley Cup, and then I think he went back to St. Louis after. This is one of those. I know this was right around where people started getting mad about rentals. Oh, that team won a cup, but look, those guys are just there. They're not really. There's a lot more issues people took with rentals back then. Now we don't really pay much attention to it. March 9th, 2006, Carolina gets Mark Recchi. Pittsburgh gets Christopher Kalanos, Nicholas Norgren, and a 2007 second. So Chris Kalanos, who just didn't pan out. And numerous teams took a shot at him because, again, when a guy's drafted high and he's got that pedigree and you know what, this kid, we can do something with him. Sometimes it works. Very often it doesn't. June 22nd, 2012, Carolina gets Jordan Staal. Pittsburgh gets Brandon Sutter, Brian Dumoulin, and a 2012 first-round pick that was Derek Pouliot. And I remember thinking, man, Pouliot and Mata in the same draft. Pittsburgh's going to be insane in a few years. This is great. Pouliot's going to be awesome. Okay. Anyways, so good deal for Carolina. February 28th, 2016, Carolina gets a 2017 second, 2016 second, Alexi Sarella. New York Rangers get Eric Staal. This was a rental, and Eric Staal did not have a great run with the New York Rangers. We can put it that way. And for Carolina, it was seen as an underwhelming return at the time. June 15th, 2016, Carolina gets Brian Bickle and Teuvo Teravainen. Chicago gets cap space, a 2016 second and a 2017 third. Yeah, this was a cap dump. They had to get Brian Bickle's contract off, and the price to get rid of Brian Bickle's contract was Teuvo Teravainen, who now is one of the best young players for the Carolina Hurricanes. So that's a deal that's won by Carolina, but I understand why Chicago did it. June 23rd, 2018, so we're up to last year. Carolina gets Michael Furland, Dougie Hamilton, and Adam Fox. Calgary, Noah Hannafin, and Elias Lindholm. Of course, Adam Fox has now been moved to the Rangers for draft picks and signed in New York, and we'll see this fall how well he plays for New York. Furland and Hamilton. Furland, of course, has moved on as a UFA. Hamilton has been tied to trade rumors, even though he just got there. And meanwhile, Hannafin, pretty solid top four for Calgary. Still hasn't hit that ceiling that was expected of him. And Lindholm, of course, had a career year with Calgary. We'll see how it turns out next year, if that continues or if it's just a one-year wonder thing. August 2nd, 2018, Carolina acquires Cliff Pooh, a 2019 second, a 2020 third and sixth, and Buffalo gets Jeff Skinner. This is still, and I sorry Carolina fans, but to me it's a loss. If you're renting out Skinner, you should at least get a first-round pick for him. Considering the going rate that we've seen with top six forwards and the amount of goals that Skinner can put up in comparison with some of those guys, yeah, that's a bad one. June 27th, 2019, so just last week, Eric Howell is acquired by the Carolina Hurricanes, going to Vegas, Nicolas Roy, and a 2021 fifth-round draft pick. That, to me, is still a win for Carolina because Vegas needed to dump off some money, and Carolina said, we can take some money. So it's going to be interesting to see if Carolina is able to maintain the momentum they had from this spring and their run into the Stanley Cup I was going to say semifinal, but conference final. And we'll see where things end up for them. It's been quite the mediocre storyline for Carolina mostly. And then playoffs, we're going to the conference finals because it's what we do. 2009, 2019. And then in between, who needs playoffs? We'll see if they can maintain that level. I have some concern because there are some players from last year's Carolina team that won't be on this year's Carolina team, and I think those players could end up hurting them. But that's something to get into for a season preview, which of course I start doing next month. Anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below regarding the history of the Carolina Hurricanes. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just tap it upon this video, and hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.